Hey, how's it going, guys? We're going to go over the slicer software for our Lulzbot 3D printers in the classroom. So I also shared with you an article that kind of goes through what a slicer is software-wise and how it works a little bit. Pretty short article. I'll have you guys read that. But this is the actual slicer software, and I'm going to have you guys download this. It's called Cura, and Cura makes slicer software for a couple different companies. But if you Google Cura Lulzbot, which is up here in the left corner, you can download this software. It's free. It's a pretty quick install, and it works pretty good. So I'm just going to go over with you how this all works. So here, obviously in the middle is our 3D printer platform. And so this right here identifies the type of 3D printer. So that's the one that we use. So the Lulzbot TAS 6. And this is just the tool head that's on it. And you can change that in printer settings. You can go in here and add printers depending on the type of printer that you have. So let's open up a model and we'll go through the controls for it. So we'll click Open File, and I'm going to grab, this is the Rocktopus, the Lulzbot little mascot, basically. And so when you do that, there it is. And I'm just going to go over the controls real quick too. So if you push down your mouse button and hold it, it's going to pan. So you can pan with your window right there. Rolling the mouse button in and out is going to zoom in and out. And then holding down your right mouse button is going to allow you to rotate. So the pan is going to come in really handy because when you zoom in, you might need to use the pan to get exactly where you need it to be. So holding down the mouse wheel will get you to pan. So, all right. Then we're going to go and this is going to allow us to edit the part if needed when we bring it in. So when we click the object and we have to click it, we have to select it. We can then move it, so we can translate it. You know, in the X, Y, and Z. We can also, we can translate it here with, you know, a number. We can also just drag it. We can drag it up or down. Ideally, you want this sitting on your build plate, you know, down flat on the build plate. So if it's not flat on the build plate, you would want to move it so and rotate it. If you know, do whatever you need to do to get it sitting flat, as flat as you can on the build plate. Scale, you can do it by percentage, you can do it by exact measurements. As long as this is clicked, uniform scaling, it's going to scale in all three directions. So if we, you know, go, you know, 150, it's scaled in all three directions. But if we undo that, we go like 125, it's going to scale it in the X direction, that amount. So typically we use, you know, we keep uniform scaling on all the time. All right, rotate. You can kind of see what this does. So you can grab one of the rings. Let's see. Grab the blue ring. We can rotate it around. And usually this comes in handy if you're trying to nest parts closely and you want to get them closer to each other, and it would be easier to you know, rotate it to get it to fit right. The other thing this allows you to do, let's say your model is kicked up like this. Like I said before, we want it to be able to be flat on the build plate. Right here, you can say lay flat, and it should move it back to flat. Yeah, it's doing its thing right here. Usually that goes quite a bit quicker. It just kind of slaps it down there. But that can come in really handy. Okay, this is taking a little longer than usual. There we go. Okay, so it did it. So now it's flat on the build plate again. Mirror, I don't use too often, but you can mirror your part if needed. Then the other one that comes in handy is this multiply objects. So if you click that and you can say, I want to do 3 copies. And I think my computer is just really slow. Okay, here's another good one to look at. Okay, so now you're going to notice the one octopus that is gray, has the stripes on it. That means it's hanging off the build plate, which means we're going to have to move some stuff around so that it's going to fit. Okay, now we're all good. All right, so those are the basic controls over here on this side. The next thing we want to look at is right over here. So I'm just going to delete these so that we can see what's going on a little easier. Okay, so in the category, you can do beginner, advanced. Usually I just leave it in, I think I leave it in beginner usually. It gives you fewer settings to mess around with. I think that's usually, we'll just leave it in advanced for now, but I think beginner's the same. Next thing you want to do is you're going to select your material. So typically we're either using PLA or we're using ABS. And so this ABS right here is usually the one we want to, actually, we'll usually use PLA. This list is quite small right now. But anyway, usually PLA and ABS are found in that list. To do this, the speed is kind of tells you, if it's higher speed, it's going to be lower quality and lower resolution, but it's going to take a lot less time. So it depends on the part that you want, the level of detail, if you're willing to spend the time. We usually stick with standard. But if you have a really high detail part, you can do that too. And then here's the other one that's really helpful to look at is the infill. So infill, typically when you open, Cura, it's at 20% infill. And that is how much the part is filled with material. So typically, and you'll see the slicing each time I change a setting. Infill is so this part is not solid when you 3D print it. You can print it solid. If you did 100% infill, it would be a completely solid plastic part. But typically, to save time and material, you would infill it with a pattern. So like a honeycomb or a triangular pattern. And we're going to look at that pattern right now. So if we go to view and we go to layer view, we're going to be able to drag this down, and you're going to see each layer as it's added. So you can really get a good idea of how your part is actually going to print. But it also helps you check out your infill. So there's your infill pattern right there going down, kind of looks like a waffle. So this is all, empty. This is all airspace right in here. And then you've got ribs going through it. And if we increase that, let's go to 40%. And this is going to slice it again. And we'll just see what that looks like. Okay, and now you've got a tighter infill pattern in the middle there. So that's pretty cool. All right, so we're going to just go back to the normal solid view. Like this. Okay, now that we've generated our, we've determined what infill amount that we want to have, we can move down to here, generate support. So generate support is, you usually want to have that on. So any overhangs, any things that in this model doesn't have a lot of overhangs. So if this guy's arm was rotated forward and was hanging like it, was more at a 45-degree angle, it would develop a bunch of support material underneath it as it prints on its own. And so it just generate that support. So usually I have that clicked on, because if you don't need it, it won't give you any. So if the program says, oh, you don't need any support, it just doesn't add it. But if it does, it adds it on its own. So that's good. The last thing I'm going to go over is the build plate adhesion. So that is, so there's three options. There's skirt, well, there's four, I guess. Skirt, brim, raft, and none. So the three options that we're going to talk about, skirt is it will just print around the outside of this a little strip, like a little halo, basically. And all that does is it gets it kind of primes the nozzle. So if it's, if the printer filament is kind of old or something's kind of funny with the filament, it'll print through that bad section right at the beginning, and it'll kind of straighten itself out as it goes around. Then once it gets to your print, it's all ready to go. It's kind of warmed up, basically. And if you're printing the skirt and you notice that it's not printing correctly because you're watching it, that's a good indicator to to change your filament or make an adjustment somewhere else. Brim and rafts. Okay, so let's talk about the raft. And I'm actually going to switch to a website. No. I didn't want that. Hold on, there it is. Okay. Okay. So here is a raft, and you can kind of see here's a demonstration of the skirt. The raft is a really thick, basically platform that this prints on. So the place this comes in handy is if you're printing, let's say you're printing a person, and it's a really tall person, but the only two things touching the build plate are their feet. So the contact area with the build plate is very small, but the model is pretty big. You would want to use a raft underneath that. So it would print this big raft that would stick really well to the build plate. And then the person's feet would get printed on top of the raft, and the feet stick really well to the raft. Like the feet will stick a lot better to the raft than it will to the build plate. So that person will be really solid, because what will happen otherwise is it'll get up to a certain height and then the person will literally fall over, like it'll come unstuck from the build plate, and then it's kind of a mess. Okay, the third option is brim. And so the brim doesn't go underneath the model. Actually, it's not underneath it. It's just like a hat. So it starts printing and connecting to the very outside of the part. And it just gives you a little bit more build plate adhesion. So if you've got, a decent area that's touching the build plate, but you'd like a little bit more security to make sure it doesn't come unstuck, you would select the brim. The brim obviously takes less material, so it takes less time. It's also easier to take off at the end because it's only attached in a very thin little layer of plastic right along the edge, so you can get those off pretty easily. So, all right, so we'll go back to Cura. All right, so once we've determined our build plate adhesion, I'm going to stick with skirt because this has so much surface area, the bottom of the octopus. That's going to stick really well to the build plate, so I don't want to add any other stuff. All right, so then we've got prepare. That's what we just did, is we prepared our model. And now we're going to go into monitor. And so here's where you actually are talking to your machine. So I'm not actually hooked up to the machine right now. But what we would do, and you can see there's no printer connected. You would click connect right here. And if you're hooked to a 3D printer, it's going to, instead of saying no printer connected, it'll say searching, and then it'll say connected once it's hooked up. The hot end control, you can go ahead and type in, usually the preheat setting is 210 degrees. So you'd say 210 and say preheat. And then on this scale, you'll see this is a temperature scale. You'll see it rising until 200, and then you'll see it level off right just above 200. And then you know that your hot end is up to temperature. And then you can actually do a little test extrusion. And so you would type in your extrusion amount. I usually do 30 millimeters, and then I say extrude. But only once this gets up to the proper heat can you do that. It won't extrude if it's not up to the heat. This will just allow you to make sure that your filament is extruding correctly, that it's not jammed up in the extruder. So usually when I start a print for the first time, I'll test the extruder first. If I've just done a print and it was printing fine, I won't do that. I'll just keep going. The other thing you can do here is you can move the printer head. So you can, like, let's say the print head is down close to the table and you wanted to clean the table off. You can do a move length and then click direction. You can also home. When you click home, it'll go to that home location for each one of your X, Y, and Z axes. So, and then these are also just quick commands, predefined commands. So you can preheat bed, cool bed, wipe the nozzle. I don't usually use those. The ones I usually use though is just to make sure that everything's running correctly. And then once you've got a good extrusion, you've tested your extrusion and that's looking good. Then you can, down here, there would be a start print button and you would just press start print. So that's a quick demonstration of our slicer. So you can go ahead and kind of mess around and import an STL or an OBJ, and you can mess around with the controls. What I'm going to have you do for your final project that we'll talk about is I'm going to have you share it with me. I'll have you save your file, and it'll save in the lulzbot format, and I'll just have you share with me all of your infill setup. I'll have you select the correct material, all that stuff. So so you'll have to use this for your final. So just download and let me know how that goes. And yeah, we'll talk soon.